All right, well, welcome to the second part of Chapter 3. Today we're going to be talking about the assessment of individual differences. I hope you enjoy learning about all of this today. So last time we were talking about the actual individual differences themselves and how people are different. We talked about one of my favorites, G, or general mental ability, and then we talked about personality. We talked a little bit about physical abilities, and we rounded out by talking about interests. Today we're going to be talking about what a test is and where we find them, what the different types of test categories are, how we evaluate the quality of a test, and then we're going to evaluate the validity, impact, fairness, and cost of a number of different assessments of constructs that are used in IO psychology. But first, think of a test as any objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior. The things or attributes that we measure or assess are what we call the content. The ways we measure or assess these things or attributes is what we call the process. So last week we focused on the content, right? The things we assess like G, personality, physical abilities, interests, and other individual differences. Well, this week we focus on the process or the methods that we measure these attributes with. So using this definition, that is, an objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior, are these things that I list examples of tests? You tell me. So as an interview, an objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior? Yes, it is. What about a set of multiple choice questions administered to a group of people at once? Is this a test? Is it an objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior? Once again, the answer is yes. What about the observation of someone performing a task at work? Is it an objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior? And once again, yes, that is an example of a test. Finally, what about an application blank? Is it an objective and standardized procedure for measuring a psychological construct using a sample of behavior? And finally, once again, you guessed it, yes, it is. Keep in mind that what we measure, that is to say the content, is not the same as the way we measure or process. Let me give you an example that illustrates this. Let's say that we are interested in measuring technical knowledge for an applicant in the area of word processing. So in this example, the what or content that we're interested in assessing is technical knowledge of word processing. The way we measure it or the processes we can use come in a variety of ways. So I could measure technical knowledge with a paper and pencil test, right? Well, couldn't I also interview applicants to assess their technical knowledge of word processing? What about references? Couldn't I talk to other people who know an applicant and ask about the technical knowledge from others who know the applicant or have worked with them? What about an actual word processing task? Could I do that? Sure, I could. And finally, couldn't I look into the educational background of the applicants, perhaps seeing if they have a particular subject matter completed, or maybe an associate's degree in administrative office assistant? Yes, all these are processes for measuring the content or attributes of technical knowledge. Another way of looking at the difference between content and process is to look at the following table. On the left are the attributes of reasoning and social skills. On the top are the different methods that we can use to measure these attributes, reasoning and social skills. So we can use a paper and pencil test to measure both reasoning and social skills, and an interview to do both as well. So once again, content does not equal process. Okay. So now that we get that content does not equal process, let's move on and ask ourselves, what does a test score mean anyways? What I want us to understand here is that the process of assigning a score is different from interpreting the meaning of a score. For example, receiving an 85 on some tests leads this person to feeling this. Looks like she's pretty elated. On the other hand, it leaves this person feeling like this. Looks like he feels pretty crummy, eh? So, There's a technical way of assigning meaning to a test score, and that process is called norming. Basically, the process of norming allows us to create meaning to a test score by comparing one test score to all the other scores in a group. The norm group is the group whose test scores are used to compare and understand an individual's test score. The important thing to understand here is that norming allows us to interpret test scores because it provides a comparison standard. Now, where do we find tests? Well, tests are really all around us. In IO Psychology, there's a special publication called the Mental Measurements Yearbook that is a comprehensive guide to just about every mental test you can find with complete reviews. It's great. This is a wonderful set of publications. They tell you things like how much a test costs, what it measures, the samples that they've been normed against, and a whole lot of other information. The first one was published in 1938, and it's been revised 15 times since then. Now let's quickly move on and talk about the different categories of tests. The first category is a difference between speeded versus power tests. Speeded tests have rigid and demanding time limits. Remember when I said that the NFL used the Wonderlic, an intelligence test, to assess draft recruits? Well, it's a speeded test because there are 50 items and you have only 12 minutes to take the test. A speeded test is a good way to provide some serious variability among candidates. However, before we get excited and gung-ho about offering speeded tests, you have to be very careful and ask yourself if the job actually requires speed. If it doesn't, you might not want to consider using a speeded test. On the other hand, you might want to look into a power test. Power tests have no rigid time limits and really allow a person to display what they know, but again, with no time limits. And the answer is, what is Jeopardy? For an example of a test that is speeded. Another category of tests is group versus individual tests. Individual tests are useful in assessing a candidate's style of problem solving. And obviously, as the term suggests, you are testing one person at a time. Obviously, there are some benefits and some drawbacks to group and individual tests. Because a test is done individually, you, as I said, can assess a person's style and really look at how one person is performing with regard to whatever it is that you're trying to measure. And obviously, on the other hand, group testing is valuable because you can test a number of people all at once, which helps to really reduce costs. Another category is paper and pencil versus performance tests. Performance tests assess skills in performing tasks and knowledge of how to carry out actions. Remember when we talked about using a hands-on test to measure technical knowledge of word processing skills? Well, that's a great example of a performance test. All right, let's move on and talk about how we evaluate the quality of tests. Let's say that I'm interested in just assessing very basic math skills, very basic, as you see in the cartoon illustrated here on the board. Well, unfortunately, in the old days, someone might try to measure basic math skills by asking a question like this. If one were asked to calculate the arithmetic sum of the two integers that have been produced below, what would the resultant be? This is clearly not a very smart way of asking a question that is trying to assess basic math skills, as you can see by the name of the person who wrote this. Haha. Well, to understand how we evaluate the quality of a test, we have to understand a few different terms. These are bias, fairness, and culture. Let's start by taking a look at bias. Bias asks the following question. Is it possible for a test to predict that individuals will have lower or higher job performance than they actually do? So remember that a test simply is used to predict how well someone will perform, and with bias, we're asking whether the test will predict whether or not a person, based upon the test, will have lower or higher job performance in actuality. So the bottom line here is that bias gets at the degree to which test scores result in errors in prediction for a subgroup. The things to keep in mind is that there will always be errors, but what we're interested in knowing for our purposes of determining whether we have a quality test or not is whether these deviations between what the test predicts and actual performance are related to subgroups. That subgroup could be people of different age groups, it could be people of different ethnic backgrounds, it could be people of different genders, it could be a number of different things. Let me illustrate an example. Again, our definition of bias is that it is the degree to which test scores result in errors in prediction for a subgroup. The graph on the right is an illustration of the relationship between test scores and actual job performance. This idea can be tricky for students to understand. Let me try to explain this as simply as possible. Let's say that we're looking at whether a test is biased against either men or women. So that's our subgroup, gender, men or women. We can look at this by comparing scores between men and women with any test. Let me explain the colors of the lines that you see here. Let's say that the red and blue line represents the actual relationship for men and women by themselves. The black line in the middle is what the test predicts for the group as a whole, so for women and men combined, which is found by simply taking the average of the red and blue lines for women and men, so it's right in the middle, which you would expect if it's an average. For the sake of clarity, let's say that females are illustrated by the red line and that males are illustrated by the blue line. There are two situations that occur when you have bias. One is called underprediction. The other is called overprediction. In either case, the test is leading to errors for one particular group or another. Okay, so let's look at the individual cases of both underprediction and overprediction and see if we can get a handle on this tough subject. Let's start with the case of underprediction. What I'm going to show you is an example where the test underpredicts the performance of women who are represented in red and men who are represented in blue. So the black line again is what the test predicts for the combined groups, both men and women. Thus here we see that the average is we see that the average in underprediction for the women in red, because the black line representing both groups is below that of the red line for women. What this means in practical terms is that the test predicts that the women will do worse than they actually do. Now let's switch and take a look at the case of overprediction. In this same case, where the men are represented in blue, what the test predicts for both groups, the average is in black. As you can see here, the line in blue for men is below that for the combined groups, which means that the test overpredicts the performance of men. What this means in practical terms, again, is that the test predicts that men will do better than they actually do. I hope you understand this. This is a tricky subject to get. Now moving on to another concept that helps us to understand the quality of a test, and that's the topic of fairness. Fairness, as you might suspect, is inherently subjective and is basically a value judgment about the outcomes associated with test scores. So if we have a firefighter test that leads to the lowered selection of female firefighters, you might ask, is that test fair? Well, the concept of fairness basically says that it's up to each of us to determine whether or not we believe that test is fair. And again, that's inherently subjective. Culture can generally be viewed as a system of shared meanings and a common way of viewing events and objects. However, when it comes to tests, we're basically asking whether or not test takers have the opportunity to become familiar with the subject matter or the process required by a particular test. For example, in the area of educational teacher certification, it used to be that the test would assess cultural literacy, and these were things that not everyone had the same experience with, and so a lot of people questioned whether or not this was a fair test. Let me illustrate a humorous example of how culture influences test taking and can lead to bias for certain groups. Not too long ago, researchers, and I believe their names were Redden and Simmons, which is why it's called the Redden-Simmons RAP test, developed what is known as a RAP test, a test designed to measure black cultural fluency. Keep in mind, this is not intended to be serious. It's meant to illustrate that some tests can be inherently biased against subgroups. In this case, the test is biased against people who don't understand. Well, I'll let you see for yourself what they are suggesting. Some people might not understand. And again, this is humorous, so don't take this seriously. Don't play the dozens. What does this mean? Look at your choices. Does it mean don't gamble, don't talk about other family members, don't try to stay up around the clock, or don't date too many people at once? Well, they say it means don't talk about other family members. She's a Mary Jane girl. She smokes marijuana. She's someone's pet project. She has a pimp, or all of the above. Well, Rick James said she smoked marijuana, at least when I was growing up. That's what the song said. But according to this test, it's all of the above. I got some new kicks. I just got some new drugs. I've just been in a fight. I've got some good gossip for you. I've got some new shoes. I've got some new shoes. Let me throw down on this plate. Let me check the quality of this marijuana. Let me snort some cocaine. Let me finish eating. Let me steal this car. And the answer choice is C. Let me finish eating. I used to say this when I was younger. I'm about to throw down on this plate. She's buffed. She's got a cute rear end. She's overweight. She's wearing leather. She's got polished manners. And this again means she's overweight. He bumped me. He tried to start a fight. He sold me some bad drugs. He missed my vein and injected dope into my muscles. He took me on a date but brought somebody else home. Gosh, that's awful. C. He missed my vein and injected dope into my muscles. I hope no one ever bumps you guys. He's clean. He's dressed up really nice. He doesn't have any drugs on him. He's off parole. He doesn't snitch. In this case, they say he's dressed up really nice. Dog food. Is it heroin, cocaine, downers, or amphetamine? I had no idea about this one, but apparently it is heroin. Dogs. Well, anyone ever hear someone say, "My dogs are killing me"? If they said that, that means their feet are killing me. Speedball. Is that amphetamines, cocaine and heroin combination, LSD with amphetamines, or amphetamines and alcohol? That is a cocaine and heroin combination. I hope none of you guys are doing speedballs. It's rock. Is it a musical style? Is it high quality drugs? Is it a solid friendship, or is it sex? It's rock is high quality drugs. And finally, stop dipping. Does that mean get out of my drug supply, don't mess around on me anymore, quit being nosy, or all of the above? It means quit being nosy. So if someone's getting in your business and you don't want them to, tell them stop dipping. Okay, in just a second we're going to talk about assessment procedures. I hope you've enjoyed the RAP test and our discussion of tests, and I'll see you in a minute. Take care.